but I have it anyway. You've already gotten to know our speaker if he came in a few minutes early and he entertained us. Dr. Ted Hansen is a lifetime educator, historian, and super volunteer up with the Friends of the Alamance Battleground. I encourage all of you to go up there and visit the battleground if you don't know it. But I've got a feeling this afternoon that we're going to be entertained by some, not only our music, but some good history from Dr. Ted. And I am delighted that he's here today. So, without any further introduction, here's our speaker for today, Dr. Ted Hansen, otherwise known as Rednap Howell.
Well, good afternoon. I was just going over some notes of mine about events that have happened in the last few years. Oh, let me introduce myself. I am Rednap Howell. I came from the colony of New Jersey in 1750 to Orange County. Why did I come here? Because I was a school teacher by trade. And in 1750, I was told there was not a school teacher to be found in all of Orange County. So I came here to see if the people would allow me to come in, live among them, and start some type of educational program for their children. I found them very welcoming, so I came in. I settled in the southern part of Orange County because, you know, it was huge. And in 1771, the part that I first settled in became Chatham County. Now, as a teacher, however, I was itinerant, and I moved from house to house teaching. And so I got to be well known all throughout Orange County. You could say that the people got to know me, they began to trust me, they knew that I was educated, and they would talk to me. Quite often I would spend the evening in the children's homes where their parents would sit around the fireplace and they would tell me about what they were facing. And it became very apparent very quickly that there was a big breakdown between the local government and the local citizens. And something had to be done about that. But in order to understand that, you've got to understand what the government was like in the 1700s in the colony of North Carolina. We're a royal colony. We have a royal governor that's appointed by the king. Now, he's headquartered down east. He was first in Brunswick Town, and then he went to Wilmington, and finally Governor Tryon built his palace down in Newburgh. We're using our money to do it, and we have never had the opportunity to see it. But I digress. The governor had a colonial assembly. Each county represented elected representatives. However, the counties in the eastern part of the state were very small. The counties in the west were huge. So the east dominated the legislature, and whatever they wanted, they got passed. The governor did have an advisory council. That council was made up of his friends. He met with them. They gave him advice on what they thought he should do. Now we come down to the local government. Here's where the problems came in. And I'm going to use Orange County as the example. Hillsborough became the county seat of Orange County. In 1760, a man by the name of Edmund Fanning came down from New York, where he was already an absentee office holder. He came into Hillsborough, and within 6 months, he became a city trustee. In 1771, he became the crown prosecutor. 6 months later, he was the register of deeds. Are you seeing a picture here, folks? When Governor Tryon moved in, he was the first one to welcome him off the ship, and he came back, and he was the colonel of the Orange County militia. In addition to that, he was a merchant, and he was a lawyer. That's too much power for anybody, especially when you use his office of Register of Deeds like he did, because we had evidence that he was charging 5 times the legal amount to file deeds. He filed whatever he wanted to. This man was getting wealthy at our expense. Now, being an intellectual and somewhat of a writer, I wrote a little song about him. And it went like this. Oh, yes. When Fanning first to Orange came, he looked but pale and wear-worn, an old patch coat upon his back, an old mare he rode on. Both man and mare weren't worth 5 pounds, as I've been often told, but with his civil robberies, he's laced his coat with gold. And do you know what Edmund Fanning did? He went out and had a coat made with gold threads through it so he could wear his coat of gold. This had to be stopped. And I took one of the leadership roles to stop it. But one man does not make a courthouse ring. Oh, no. He had 2 compadres in this. The second was Thomas Hart. Thomas Hart was the sheriff for several terms in Orange County. He was also a member of the Colonial Assembly. And then there was Francis Nash. Francis Nash was the clerk of court. He was the justice of the peace. He was a captain in the militia. And he served in the Colonial Assembly. These 3 men controlled everything that happened in Orange County. They could decide if you had committed a crime, if you were guilty or not, when you would be arrested, and they handpicked their friends as jurors, so you were guilty before you walked in the courthouse door, and there was not a thing you could do about it. And that's the kind of government we had in the back country of Carolina. And it had to be put to a stop. In 1765, we began to have meetings of regulation. We called ourselves regulators because we didn't want to overthrow the British government, but we wanted to put regulations on the local government so we could have our rights as English citizens. We stood for, number 1, no man should be able to have more than 1 elected position at a time. Number 2, all fees and taxes should be listed so exorbitant rates could not be charged. Number 3, local officials should not have the power to regulate commercial activity. And number 4, we were opposed to all extortion. Why? Because in 1768, even Governor Tryon said 50% of all of the money collected in the back country was embezzled by the sheriffs. Things came to a head in 1768. In April, 75 regulators rode on Hillsborough. They had come down to a house of a regulator, knocked on his door, told him how much tax money he owed. He didn't have the money. They took his horse. We went up to get that horse. As we were leaving Hillsborough, we happened to ride past Edmund Fanning's house. And a few of the men happened to accidentally shoot their guns into the roof of his house to let him know that we knew where he lived. Why should they be allowed to take this man's horse? Without his horse, he could not plow his ground. His family was starved. That's not right. Edmund Fanning put the militia on alert. He contacted the governor, who put the militias on surrounding counties on alert to march into Orange County if necessary. The governor told us to go back home, to pay our taxes, to stop harassing the elected leaders. In other words, we were to cease and desist. But that wasn't going to happen either. We went back home. Then on May the 1st, Thomas Lloyd, one of our elected representatives in the Colonial Assembly, signed the warrant for the arrest of Herman Husband and William Butler, 2 of our leaders. That night, 73 militiamen under Edmund Fanning surrounded Herman Husband's home. At first of dawn, they were arrested and taken to Hillsborough. The call went out all across Orange County. We need every able-bodied man to march on Hillsborough. 1,500 men walked to Hillsborough. We surrounded the entire town. No one went in and no one went out. They were afraid we were going to burn them down. Finally, 2 men came out. One was Edmund Fanning. The other was Isaac Edwards, who happened to be visiting in town and was the personal secretary to Governor Tryon. Fanning came down to the Eno River. He had a jug of wine on one shoulder, a jug of rum on the other, and shouted across, "Send me a horse so I can come over and talk to you." But Nan Bell Hamilton, who was the leader of that 1,500 men, said in his best Scottish brogue, "You're none too good to wade, and wade you will if you come up here and talk to us." Well, you should have seen those two men wading in that muddy river across there carrying their libations. When they got over there, Edmund Fanning tipped his hat and offered us something to drink, but we refused because as regulators we had taken an oath that we would never drink any spirits when we were on regulator business. Otherwise, they'd have said a drunken, rioting crowd attacked us, and this way they couldn't do it. Edwards talked to us, and we agreed that we would go home and not burn down the town if they would release our two leaders. He also agreed to send our grievances to the governor. We came home. The governor sent word that we were to go through the local assembly, the legislature, if we had grievances. We came home and we wrote petition number 9, which I have here somewhere. Oh yes, here it is. I see. We said the following things in petition number 9. The fees charged in Orange County is higher than in any other county in the state. We also pointed out, you told us to air our grievances through the legislature, and yet it was our own colonial assemblyman that arrested our leaders. Who are we supposed to talk to? We also said that taxes needed to be listed so we would know how much we are paying. And so most of that money will not end up in the pockets of the courthouse rings. We also said, we admit we should have not fired shots in Edmund Fanning's house. But that is not the problem. The problem is you've got local officials that are using extortion to get wealthy at the expense of the people. And that needs to stop. 474 men from Orange County signed that petition. James Hunter and I rode all the way to New Bern with that petition. We met with the governor. He tore it up, ushered us out. He told us to come back to Orange County, to stop using the term regulator, to pay our taxes, to stop harassing the locally elected officials. In other words, cease and desist. Well, it was too late for that to happen, I can tell you. That was not going to happen. In 1771, things came to a head. The courts issued a warrant for the arrest of James Hunter, William Butler, Herman Husband, and myself, the 4 ringleaders. They were quite surprised in Hillsborough when we rode into town with a group of regulators. We went into that courthouse. Richard Henderson was the presiding judge, and we presented him with a petition signed by 179 men from Orange County about the way the jury was picked in Orange County. We asked him to read that petition overnight. He agreed to do so. The next day we filled the courthouse before he came in. He started court, no mention of the petition. We stood up en masse and went before him and demanded our day in court, but not with that rigged jury. We wanted to be tried by a jury of our peers. He told us if we would go outside and wait peacefully, he would read our petition, and then he would give us his decision. We went outside. Some people from Hillsborough began to join us. Pretty soon we had a big group out in front of the courthouse. A lawyer came by, was determined to get inside. That was his mistake. I don't know who threw the first punch. The next thing I knew, the lawyer's on the ground and he's getting hit and kicked. And then somebody said, let's get Tryon and give him some regulator justice. Let's get Fanning and give him some regulator justice. So Edmund Fanning was dug out. They began to beat him, but some friends helped him escape. We searched for him, but we couldn't find him. So we did the next best thing. We went to his house down the street and tore it down wall by wall until there was nothing left. By this time, Governor Tryon had had enough. he decided that he was going to put an end to this for good. He had the Johnson Riot Act passed, which said that if as many as 10 people got together, you could tell them that they had to leave. And if they did not do it within 1 hour, you could use force to disperse them because you could call them a rioting mob. We were lucky in the spring of 1771. We got Herman Husband elected to that colonial assembly. We thought maybe things were changing around. Do you know what happened to him when he arrived in New Bern? They threw him in jail. When I heard that, I got on my horse and I started riding to New Bern. I got as far as Halifax, and my horse became ill. I had to stop. I spent 3 days in Halifax. While I was in Halifax, I heard that Herman Husband had been released. I saw no need to continue on to New Bern. However, I did meet with the men in Halifax, and they agreed in Saturday, 2 weeks hence, they will have a meeting of regulation. I wrote a letter to James Hunter. I told him, I'm excited because Halifax is getting ready to organize. And if they organize, the next step will be go to Edgecombe and then to Butte and from there on to Northampton. And maybe finally we can bring freedom to dear old Carolina. I also reminded him that new counties had just been created. They were Surrey, Guilford, Chatham, and Wake. And we needed to be sure that regulators were elected to every position in those counties. Then we would have the majority of the counties under regulator control, and we could achieve liberty at last. My letter was sent, but it was intercepted. It was hand-delivered to Governor William Tryon. He read the letter. He met with his council. He used it as proof that we were plotting to overthrow the British Crown. He enforced the Johnson Riot Act. In early May of 1771, he left with 800 men, militiamen, from New Bern, with 8 artillery pieces. They marched to the Eno River. By the time they got to the Eno River, they had visited other counties and forced the militia to join them. They had 1,100 men. They then began to go down the road towards Salisbury. 2,000 regulators were just beyond Alamance Creek. On May the 15th, they camped at Alamance Creek. On May the 16th, they marched 2 miles in and took position on a hill directly across a hill from where 2,000 regulators were camped. At 11 o'clock, he read the Johnson Riot Act, and he asked for our decision. We gave him our decision. He had told us to put our weapons down and go home, and he would forgive everything that we had done. Our decision was, fire and be damned. At noon, the governor gave the order for the militia to fire. Nothing happened. There was total silence on the battleground. Why? Because in some cases, a son was in the militia and the father was in the regulators. An uncle was in the militia. A nephew was on here. They didn't want to kill each other. The governor rode in front of the militia on his horse and said, you will fire on them or you better fire on me. In other words, if you don't fire this time, you're guilty of treason and I'll have you hung right here. The next time when he ordered fire, they opened fire. The battle lasted 2.5 hours. The militia had artillery. They had plenty of ammunition. Most of us just had our hunting guns and what little ammunition we carried with us. At the end of the battle, we had to leave the field. The governor had won. He put prisoners in chains, marched them to Salisbury, and then to Bethabara, and then to Hillsborough, where he had a trial for 12 of them. He condemned all 12 in a military trial. He hanged 6 that day. The other 6, he sent the record of the trial to the Privy Council, which was the British custom, to wait for their permission for them to be hung. He declared the 4 ringleaders, including myself, outlaws. That meant that if anybody captured me and killed me or turned me in alive, they would have 100 British pounds or 1,000 acres of land. I was forced to leave the colony of North Carolina forever. I went back to New Jersey. I never married, and I died a pauper because I had lost everything in the War of Regulation in North Carolina. We did not die in vain on that battlefield, because after the American Revolution, when the new state of North Carolina was created, most of what we asked for was written into the new state constitution. What happened to Governor Tryon? Well, by the time that battle was fought, Governor Tryon had already been appointed the governor of New York. As soon as he had the military trial in Hillsborough, he went to New York. The Privy Council met. They read through the Johnson Riot Act. King George III was in there, and he said, that's unconstitutional. The man cannot do it. But it was too late. The battle was over. Too many men had already died. And as for the 6 other prisoners, when the news came back from London, they were all totally pardoned of any wrong. The only 2 men that were never pardoned was Herman Husband and myself, Rednap Howell. All other regulators would eventually be pardoned. This battle was fought 250 years ago on May the 16th. May it never be forgotten. Thank you.